Let's take a look at the perfect tense. It's not used as often as the present or the aorist, but it is significant nonetheless. So we will review rules for forming perfect indicative verbs, and then we'll look at examples of perfect verbs, and that would include isolated examples, and then we'll look at some New Testament sentences. And along the way, we will discuss the meaning of the perfect tense. So let's go ahead and begin here. So the perfect active indicative, it involves something called reduplication. Now we've seen the idea in the past tenses of the augment. Reduplication is different, and we'll see some examples. The perfect stem may be different from the present stem, but it may be the same. The tense formative for the perfect active is a kappa alpha, ka, and it uses primary active endings. So let's take a look at reduplication. So if the first letter is a consonant, then we would take the same consonant, add an epsilon to it, and then tack that on at the beginning of the verb. So for instance, with miseo, I hate, we would take the initial mu, we add an epsilon to it, and then we tack it on to the rest of the perfect form of this verb, which in this case would be mise. The epsilon is lengthened to an eta before the ending, and then we have the ka ending. And because it's first person singular, there is no ending. It's a null ending. So we have memiseka. The thing to pay attention to here is the reduplication. Now, if the first letter is a phi, a chi, or a theta, we do a square of stops substitution. So for a phi, we change that to a p. So for phino, we get pephaneroka. So the reduplication then takes a p and then puts that before the f sound, probably because puffé is easier to say than fuffé. If the first letter is a chi, we change that to kappa. So for kriye, which would be, in this case, is third person, he anoints, and that would change to kechriken. So the chi changes just to a kappa. And then finally, an example of theta turning to tau, we have the verb thuo, to sacrifice, and we get that in the perfect as tethuka. So the theta is reduplicated as a tau. Now, what happens if the first letter is a vowel? Well, the vowel lengthens. So for instance, hetoimadzo, which would be I prepare, the epsilon lengthens to an eta, and we get hetoimaka. So the vowel just lengthens. If the first letter is a diphthong, it may change or it may not change. As an example, we have aiteo. In this case, the alpha iota changes to an eta with an iota subscript, ateka. So for horiskamen, which would be the verb horisko in the first person plural, notice that there is no change, that the vowels don't lengthen, and we just get hurekamen. So in some cases, a diphthong will lengthen, some cases it won't. One final note on reduplication, there's a few forms that are irregular, including the sigma kappa, sigma p, sigma tau, and a few others, where instead of reduplication, they just add an epsilon. So for instance, the verb scorpizzamatha, this would be the present tense, we are scattered, and the perfect of this, instead of sescor, it's going to be escor, escorpismatha. That's a middle passive. And another example is speirace. From sparrow to sow, this is present active indicative second singular, and the corresponding form here in the active would be escarpas. So instead of ses, it's going to be s. I think they just figured it was too difficult to put all those S's together. The final example is for the verb starao. And so if we have starutai, which is your present middle passive indicative, third singular, and then in the perfect middle passive, it would be estaurotai rather than sestaurotai. The verb means to crucify, so this would be he has been crucified. This is the only one that appears in the New Testament, by the way. These others are in the Septuagint, so it's not real common. And so this looks like an augment. This epsilon looks like an augment, but we can tell that it's a reduplication, that it's a perfect, both from the tense formative. We see that in the active, this middle one here, you see the ka tense formative, and also from the primary endings. For the middle passives, we've got the tai and the metha. Those are primary endings. So let's review the perfect active paradigm for luo. And so we see the stem lu, and then we have the reduplication le, and then the ka tense formative and the null endings. It's the first singular leluka, second singular lelukas. It's pretty straightforward, the sigma ending in the ka. And then we have leluken. Now here's one case where the ka changes to a ke. So rather than kappa alpha, we have kappa epsilon. So we get leluken. And then the first plural, lelukamen. So we just have ka plus men, very straightforward. Second plural, lelukata. And then finally, the third plural, lelukasin. And this is a case where we have ka and then the nsin, but the nu drops out. And so we just have kasin as the ending. Now let's look at perfect middle passive. So there's the same idea of reduplication as we see for the perfect active. The perfect stem may be different, so this is the same idea as for the perfect active. There is no tense formative, and there are no connecting vowels. This is one case where we have no tense formative and no connecting vowels, somewhat unusual. And then we have primary middle passive endings. We've seen those before for the present tense. So let's look at the perfect middle passive paradigm for, again, luo. So here we have lelumai. Perfect middle passive ending, mai just plugs right onto the stem. So there's reduplication, le, and then lu, and then the ending plugs right onto the stem. No tense formative, no connecting vowels. Similarly for second singular, lelusai, and third, lelutai. So the mai, sai, tai are just plugged right onto the ends. This is one of the few cases where the sai ending doesn't undergo any changes. Then for first plural, we have lelumatha, second plural, lelustha, and then finally third plural, leluntai. The perfect middle passive is a little unusual, but it's very straightforward. It's not hard to figure out. You got the reduplication, and you have the primary middle passive endings. Let's talk about the meaning of the perfect tense. The standard definition of the perfect is a completed action that has occurred in the past with effects that continue into the speaker's present. So not the reader, but the speaker. And so we would say, I have completed something. I have painted my house. So the idea is I painted it, but the action still has effects in the present. The house is still painted. Now this definition is subject to context. We don't want to take a very rigid definition and try to impose it upon the vast array of contexts when a perfect tense could appear. But the standard definition, sort of a working ballpark definition, is what we say here. A completed action that's occurred in the past with effects that continue into the speaker's present. So let's look at some examples of perfect indicative. We have kekleken, kekleken. This is a perfect active indicative third singular from kaleo. Notice that we have the clay, and that's your aorist looking stem. So it's not the same as the present tense, which is kal. So we said that sometimes the perfect stem changes from the present tense stem. Then we have the reduplication, ke, so kek, clay. The tense formative for third singular is ke, and then the ending is nu. So kekleken. We have peplanesthe. This comes from planao, which is to deceive. This is going to be a passive. Notice that we have the reduplication, the pe, and then we have planesthe. So there's no tense formative. We have the contract vowel alpha coming before the ending there, and that is then lengthening to eta, and then we put that second plural ending right up against it. No tense formative, no connecting vowels. So just peplanesthe. And this would be, the meaning here would be passive, so that would be you were deceived. You plural were deceived. The first one here is perfect active indicative, so that would be he has called. He, she, it has called. So here we have agapeikamen. Agap looks a lot like agap, so agapao, and we have the alpha is now lengthened to an eta. The reduplication is a lengthening here. And then we have the ka, the perfect active tense formative. The alpha contract vowel is lengthened before that tense formative to an eta. So we have a, and then we have the active tense formative ka, and then that bumps up right against the men, the first plural ending. So perfect active indicative first plural of agapao, and this would be we have loved. We have loved. Here we have parakaklematha. That's a mouthful. Parakaklematha. This is an example of where we have a compound verb, and as we do for the augment, we put the augment before the primary verb. So parakaleo, we have the preposition para, and then we have kaleo is the primary verb. Similarly, for perfects, the reduplication occurs before the primary verb. So we don't say pepara, we say parakekle. So the ke comes before the primary stem here, which is clay, and then we have the metha, which is our passive or middle passive ending. And so here we have a perfect passive indicative first plural. And this would then be we were encouraged, that passive idea. Just as with the second aorist and the second future, there is a second perfect, although it's pretty rare. A few common verbs show up this way. The tense formative is alpha instead of kappa alpha, but how it looks is hard to predict. It only applies to active forms because the middle passive has no tense formative. So here's some examples of verbs that you'll see fairly often, and it's just worth knowing what they look like. So akuo, here's the second singular form, akuata. In the aorist, it's akusas, but in the perfect, it's akekaata. Again, it's hard to predict exactly how this is formed, but the alpha kappa helps you to see that it is akuo. Another example is ginomai, and so in the aorist, that would be egenamein, and then in the perfect, it's gegana. Not easy to predict, but there it is. Grapho, very common word to write. The aorist, it's egropsa, and in the perfect, it's gegrapha. We do see the reduplication, ge, and then graph we recognize. So this one we can recognize as a perfect, even though we don't see the ka typically that comes with a perfect. Erkomai, here's an interesting one. So the aorist is already strange with eothon. The perfect is elelutha. Again, this is the first singular form across. And this is just an odd one that we have to be familiar with. Finally, we've seen lambano quite a bit in terms of second aorist. So here's a third singular form, lambanen. The elaben is what we'd expect for that second aorist where we have a different stem. But over in the perfect, we have elefen. So just an unexpected form here. Technically second perfect, but it's worth just knowing what it looks like because it's hard to predict that this is second perfect. We have a few other common verbs that have some strange forms. So for example, we have lege, to say. This is the third singular, which occurs often. The aorist would be apen, but the perfect is arekin. And so there's not a lot of continuity between present, aorist, and perfect. Another example is harao, to see, and this is the first singular form. The aorist would be adon, and the perfect is heoraka. And so again, there is a lot of difference between the perfect and the other forms. These are so common that you get familiar with them. Finally, let's look at one outlier, and that's the verb oida. And so this is a very common verb, and it is perfect tense, but it never shows up in the present tense. And so the meaning came to be present tense. So the verb means I know, and the perfect tense meaning then is equivalent to present tense. So when we talk about the characteristics of perfect tense in general, they don't apply to oida. Oida is going to have a present tense meaning. Let's take a look at some examples. So we're looking at the Mounce's Basics of Biblical Greek workbook, a fourth edition, and he's copied some sentences out of the New Testament, which I got from the Nestle Aland 28, NA 28. So I'm giving credit for that, although it's pretty much the same as what you see in the workbook. So let's take a look at these exercises from chapter 25. And we'll start with John 7:47. It's number 2 in the workbook for chapter 25. So let's read this. We have apokrithesan un autois hoi phariseoi me kai humes peplanesta? A little question mark at the end, that semicolon looking thing. All right, so apokrithesan. Here we have the nice theis, and we have the ape, which looks like a nice aorist augment. And the theis is going to be our aorist passive. And this comes from apokrinomai, which is he answered, or I answered. The amai tells us it's a deponent verb. And so this is going to be, we're expecting either a middle or a passive. In this case, the passive has an active meaning. The ending there, asan, is going to be your third plural. And so we have they answered. We need to see if there's an explicit subject here. Un, therefore, so that's a post-positive. We would translate it typically therefore. I mean, we could say they answered therefore, but often we would say therefore they answered. And then we have autois, to them, and then hoi pharisaioi. See the nominative plural article, hoi, and so we know that pharisaioi also has the nominative plural ending. That'd be Pharisees. So the Pharisees looks like the subject, and then the Pharisees answered. therefore, to them, autois. That's a dative plural. So the Pharisees answered therefore to them, or therefore the Pharisees answered them. And then here's what the quote is that they're saying. Me, not, kai humes, peplanesta. All right, so here we see this nice reduplication going on. So the pe, pla, and so we're looking for a perfect. What kind of perfect? Well, we have the the coming right after the end of the stem there. This is planao, to deceive. We see pepla nesta. The alpha contract is lengthening to an eta. And then right there we have the second plural middle passive ending. So this is going to be the perfect middle passive second plural. So we have not kai. We'll take a look at see what that is in a second. Humes, you plural, and then you are deceived. In this case, the perfect would be you have been deceived. And so not the kai here is going to be adverbial. It's going to be more like also. So not also you have been deceived. So we'd say as a question, is it not the case that you have been deceived? That'd be sort of the way that we put it into English, because we would translate that, have you also been deceived? But the not is sort of giving us a little bit of not you too sense. So is it not the case that you have been deceived? The main thing to note here is this passive perfect verb. It is middle passive form, but we will translate it as passive. You have been deceived. Okay, the next examples come from number 6 and number 8 in the workbook, although they're two successive verses. So John 3:18 and John 3:19. So let's read John 3:18. Hapistuon eis auton ou krinetai. Hada me pistuon ede kekritai. Hati me pepistuken eis ta anima tu monogenous huiou tu theou. All right, well-known verse, and we have not had participles yet, but this hapistuon is going to be the one who believes, and we can tell it's nominative masculine singular from the definite article, and so it may be the subject of our sentence. The one who believes, esauton, into him or in him, ou krinetai. So we have a nice present middle passive, probably passive meaning, from krino, which is to judge, and so ou krinetai is not judged. So the one who believes in him is not judged. So that's the first part of this verse. Ha de, so we have a postpositive de. Ha pistuon, same as we saw at the beginning. And we have a me, so, but the one who does not believe, ede already, kekritai. And so here is a perfect. The reduplication tells us, the ke tells us we're looking at a perfect. There's no tense formative, and we just have the ending, this middle passive ending, showing up jammed together with the verb itself. So this is going to be a perfect middle passive, and the verb is krino, which is the same verb that we saw before, only we're looking at a perfect. So we have the one who does not believe has been judged already. So third singular, so it's third singular over here. The one who believes in him is not judged. So that's the third singular. And then over here we have the one who does not believe has been judged already. There's a sense that he was judged in the past, but he's continuing to be judged in the present. This is a really nice example of the perfect tense and that idea of something that's happened in the past but whose action continues into the present. So he has been judged already, and that judgment continues. And then we come down here, hati, since or because, me pepistuken, we have another perfect. So we see the reduplication here, pe, and then we have pestuo, which is to believe, and then we have the tense formative, the ke, and the new ending. So can. So this is going to be a perfect active and is going to be then, again, third singular. And so what are we saying here? Because may not, pepistuken, he has not believed. And again, he has not believed in the past, and that continues into the present. So another good example of how the perfect tense works. Eis ta anima, in the name, to monogenous, the only begotten, huiu, son, to theou, of God. So in the name of the only begotten Son of God. The whole thing here then, the one who believes in him is not judged, that passive idea, but the one who does not believe has been judged already because he has not believed active in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Okay, John 3:18. Let's take a look at John 3:19 now. Go ahead and read that. Haute de estin he krisis. Krisis comes from krino, and it's judgment. It's a noun meaning judgment. Haute de estin he krisis, hate ta phos eleluthen eis ta kosmon, kai agapesan hoi anthropoi, malon ta skatas e ta phos, engar auton panera ta erga. All right, let's take a look and see what we've got here. We have haute. This is this demonstrative pronoun. It is nominative feminine singular, and it's going to match with he krisis. So he krisis is a feminine nominative singular, and so we have this. Estin is third singular of a me, present, and then he krisis. So this is the judgment. So we have a predicate nominative, and haute would be your subject. This is the judgment, hati, that. Then we have taphos, the light. Taphos is a neuter singular, and it could be either nominative or accusative. We'll have to figure out what it is when we read the rest of it. So here it's probably nominative, but we'll check that in a second. And this is followed by eleluthen. Here's a perfect. So it comes from erkomai, but it's one of those odd perfects. And it is N. There's no tense formative, but the N is telling us that it's active. And now we can look at taphos again, but we're expecting it to be nominative here as the subject of has come. So that the light has come, eis ta kosmon, into the world. So cosmos, it's accusative because it's the object of the preposition eis, into the world, kai, and agapesan. That's a nice aorist active indicative, third plural. So they loved, and then who loved? Well, here's an explicit subject, hoi anthropoi. So the men, we would maybe just say men, loved. There's the third plural verb that matches the plural subject. Malon, more, or rather than, taskatas, the darkness. And so here we have that the light has come into the world, and the men, or just men, loved rather or more taskatas. This is an accusative, the direct object of the verb, and so they loved the darkness. Malan a put together would be sort of rather than taphos. And this is also an accusative. So they love the darkness rather than the light. So the nominative and accusative are going to have the same form for the neuters. And since we're looking at objects of agapesan, we're expecting them to be accusative. So they loved the darkness rather than malon a, rather than the light. Then finally we have eingar auton panera ta erga. Note that ein is a past tense, but it's third singular. Ta erga is plural. So we have a plural, neuter plural subject, and we have a singular verb. This happens often in Greek where we have a neuter plural and a singular verb. You don't need to worry too much about it right now. Technically, it's called the schema atticum. Sometimes you will see a singular verb going with a neuter plural subject. And so we have then for were of them evil. This is also plural. It's a plural adjective, evil. And so it's being used here in this sentence, kind of an odd order. Just do it in exact Greek order. Was therefore of them evil the works. So if we put that together, for the works of them, or their works were evil. For their works were evil. So back to the beginning then, or but this, or and this is the judgment that the light has come into the world. And here again, we have the perfect idea of it came in the past, but it has an effect in the present. The light has come into the world, and men, the men literally, or men loved rather the darkness than the light. For the works of them, or their works, were evil. So some nice examples of how the perfect tense works.